So welcome to our second Paris Biotech event. My name is Yulia Dimbiske, and today we will talk about biotech startups in France. In 2019, French startups raised almost $5 billion, and there have been a lot of companies that were created. And a lot of these companies are created at the intersection of disciplines with biology, such as pharmacology, chemistry, engineering, business, healthcare, data science, statistics, and artificial intelligence. So as a result, now there are more than 2,000 companies in France working in biotech and pharma. So it's a pretty big industry. There are almost 900 medtech startups working in pharma, on medical devices, and similar. There are 700 biotech startups working on food, biofuels, 200 startups working on e-health. So they create apps to improve clinical healthcare and other things. And there are like 80 bio-cleantech companies. Overall, these companies, they employ more than 300,000 people, and this number is likely to grow. So it's a really big industry. And one of the interesting, I think, directions of combination of biology with other disciplines is biology with data science, statistics, and artificial intelligence. A lot of these new companies are made on this in this direction. So that's why we have our speaker today, Alexandra. She has a PhD in biomedical and medical engineering. She's a CEO and co-founder of ImVitro. So she will talk about in vitro fertilization and artificial intelligence. She will explain us in more details what in vitro fertilization is and how artificial intelligence can improve this process. We will talk more about her experience of building her own startup after a PhD, and she will talk a bit more about startup ecosystem in Paris.
Thanks for the introduction. So I guess I'll try to share my own screen now. Cool. Well, again, thanks for the intro. Thanks for suggesting that I talk. I hope this is interesting for you. You explained what I was going to talk about really well. And so the one thing I'll say is I kind of did it on purpose to not go too much in detail. If you want me to go into any more detail, please just ask the question. I was hoping, and I think that's what you told me, that this could be an open discussion. If you want to interrupt me, if you want to ask questions at any time, feel free to do so. And if not, we'll keep them to the end. All right, so you already said a few things. I'm Alexandra. I started a company that we call ImVitro, and so the general theme is, we use AI to tackle infertility. And so, again, what I'm going to talk to you about today are three main points. The first one, which I think my sense is that that's maybe what was more interesting, is, give you my example of how I went from being an academic and a researcher to starting my own company. Then I'm going to only lightly touch on what we do at ImVitro, and again, if you want more details, we can talk about it after. Again, why we use AI and how we can use it to improve IVF. And I'll just, again, finish with the Paris startup ecosystem, just really trying to explain how we can make the most of it, at least in my own experience. Okay, so if I start out by giving you a little bit of information about myself. So again, I'm a biomedical engineer. I started at EPFL, Ecole Politechnique Federale, Lausanne in Switzerland. I should say, by the way, I'm French and Spanish. I did a bachelor's there, and then I moved to Imperial College London for my master's in biomedical engineering. I stayed there for my PhD, and after that I moved to MIT in Boston for my postdoc. So general things I wanted to point out is I really like moving around. I feel like I learned a lot from going from one institutional system to another, a different country. So not that I could recommend it now, probably you're all done with your studies, but that's something that I feel really helped me for many reasons, especially with my network. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that I always try to get my own funding. These are the logos you see on the right. So during my PhD, I got small scholarships from Santander, from Bioengineering, from the British Council, which I didn't put here. During my postdoc, I got a really nice fellowship, a 3-year fellowship from the Cancer Research Institute. And again, I highly recommend it because it really gives you this financial independence that I personally thought was great for many reasons. So again, this is a background of a very fundamental researcher. And so without going too much in details, I wanted to give you a little bit of information about what I did during my PhD and postdoc, just so that you have a sense really of what I was working on. So generally what I can say is my research really revolved around tissue and cell culture. So for those who don't know, probably you do if most of you are biologists, it's really the ability to maintain human or actually even animal tissues and cells alive outside of the body in the lab, which is actually harder than it sounds, and very often actually looking at them under the scope for a lot of reasons. During my PhD, I was studying mouse models. So I was really trying to see if mice were a good model to study the pressure inside of your eyes, which is an important parameter when you are studying glaucoma. So without going into much details, glaucoma is an eye-related disease, and it's linked to pressure increasing inside of the eye. And so the image I'm showing you, again, without going in details, is just part of a mouse eye that I had to reconstruct in 3D after imaging it and after perfusing it in different circumstances. So again, this is just to say that what I did a lot of in my PhD was very much fundamental biomechanics. We would perfuse mouse eyes with liquid to understand how it responded to different pressures and measure the resistance and see if it could be used as a good model for human glaucoma. There was a lot of imaging, and after that, what I decided I wanted to do was to move from studying organs, so whole eyes, to cells. And so during my postdoc, what happened is that I moved to MIT because there was Professor Kam's lab, which is well known for working with cell biomechanics and microfluidics. Again, if you're interested, we can talk about it more later. The few images I'm showing you, if you look at the left, what you're seeing in green are essentially vessels of endothelial, so endothelial 3D vessels that are grown inside of microfluidic chips. And around it in red, you see fibroblasts, which actually help them, help stabilize the vessels. And in white, they're monocytes, they're immune cells. And so what I was working on was really trying to study how to recreate these vessels in the lab. That was actually already done in the lab before I got there. And I was adding the layer of immune systems, really trying to recreate how monocytes go from the inside of the vessel, outside of the vessel, to become eventually macrophages, and then seeing how they interact with cancer cells. So really fascinating stuff. Again, lots of cell culture there because you're trying to maintain all kinds of cells alive together in these chips. And you look at them over time. So you're doing a lot of time-lapse microscopy, which was presumably what you saw, with this video, where what you're seeing on the right is, again, these red cells are monocytes. I'm imaging over time, and I'm really studying how they move, what are they doing, how they go from the inside to the outside of the vessel, to study how they behave in diseases like cancer, where cell motility is quite important. So again, they don't want to go too much in detail, but hopefully it gives you a sense of how fundamental my research was, which presumably some of you know can be fascinating, but at least for me, it started getting a little, how can I say it, too far away from maybe a little more of an immediate application that I was looking for. And so this is where I really looked into how to transition from this kind of a fundamental research to a little more of an industry and applied research. And so at this point, what I wanted to point out was this scheme called Individual Marie Curie Fellowship. Maybe most of you have heard of Marie Curie, so the institute that gives out a lot of grants. At least for me, what I was familiar with was the fact that they gave lots of grants inside academic institutions in Europe. There's this fellowship, which at least was new to me, which is specifically tailored for people who want to go from academia into startups, into obviously European startups. It's called as I said, the IF 2020. There's actually different types. One of them is called the SNE, Society and Enterprise. And it is that one I applied to join a startup in Paris. And the idea again was that I really liked having this financial independence and still being able to go from academia to a startup. And so I obtained this fellowship a few years ago, and I joined this startup, this microfluidic startup called healthiest. And the idea was that with my own funding, I was going to try and start my own company. And again, I highly recommend it if people are interested. Again, I can give more detail. The idea is you need to find a company that would sponsor you, and then you write a project. And as usual with a grant, if you get it, then you have a couple of years worth of salary and a bit of money for equipment. So this is what happened with me. I joined this company. And then the other thing I did want to mention is I did start spending some time doing some scientific writing. It might feel like it's a different subject, but I personally felt like it was quite interesting, especially as an academic. I ended up writing a blog, or the blog I'm showing you that has all the articles I write, but I'm writing for this scientific editor called Technology Networks. What they do is, encourage academics and scientists to write articles, and they pay you for it. And so again, I think this is something that can be really interesting for scientists like us if you want to practice, but also expose your writing to a growing scientific community. And this is something I got interested in the last couple of years as I was trying to, reach out again of the fundamental research scope. And then the next step that really kind of helped me to materialize my transition from academia to startup was this program called Entrepreneur First. So let me tell you a little bit more about that. Entrepreneur First is, they call themselves talent investors. So what they do, they distinguish themselves from other kinds of investors because they accept you when supposedly you have not necessarily an idea and not necessarily a team. And so they recruit a bunch of people. They exist, by the way, they started in London, they're in Paris, Berlin, I think in Singapore, Bangalore. So they're growing. And the idea is, they join a bunch of people with different skills, lots of whom are academics, so people who have no experience in companies. And they give you a couple of months to try out and pair out in different teams and test out ideas. And for me, the biggest learning there was, going from quote unquote just having an idea to actually testing it on the market. And let me explain what I mean by that. It's really the idea that you want to expose, before you start executing an idea, you really want to check first with your potential customers or people down the line whether it's going to be interesting. And so I feel like that's something that you, at least in my experience, rarely do in academia. And that was a great exercise for me because really it's like, okay, you have an idea, go call X doctors, if it is doctors, and see if it is really what is needed right now. And it sounds easy, but it isn't, especially when you don't necessarily have a business background. And that was a great learning for me. And it really helps you realizing, okay, what is worth doing or not, because often you come in with an idea and with your own biases, and it's only when you confront it with expert that you realize, well, actually, maybe this is not what's needed right now. And so I joined this program maybe a year in my fellowship. So I paused my fellowship for 3 months, joined it. It's in Station F in Paris. And this is where I started the project on this company. I'll tell you a little more about it. But again, I actually do recommend Entrepreneur First. They have a special focus on helping people transition from academia into starting a company. And I think the next deadline to apply is on the 28th of September. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or anyone really at EF. They're a bunch of really nice people. So let me now tell you a bit about how this started, how the company started. So the idea is that hopefully you've seen my experience was in maintaining tissues and cells alive in the lab. So lots of cell culture. And as much as I thought it was fascinating, I felt like there was lots to do to automate it and to increase its quality control. Don't get me wrong, it was still fundamental research, so it was more than fine. But as cell culture is going to get closer to patients, which it already is, there were tons of things that obviously were not going to fly for much longer because you need to be really careful with what you do in the lab if it's eventually going to be reimplanted back in a patient, right? And there's tons of ways of automating cell culture. One of them that was close to my heart really was the fact that you spend a lot of time imaging your cells, with microscopes. You generate beautiful images, but more often than not, you either don't have the time or the ability to exploit them. And really, I thought there was something to do with it. So really, with the automation of the image analysis component side of things. And so again, this is where I think it was interesting to see how I got from this kind of pain points that I felt myself in the lab. I joined, originally I was really thinking fundamental, okay, I'm gonna build this microscope for, cell culture labs that's gonna generate images and automate them. And it's only when I got into this program, Entrepreneur First, that I was like, okay, you know what, before doing that, talk to people that do cell culture in companies. And so I talked to people who did, cancer research in pharmas, to, doctors, stem cell research. And it's just in this iteration process that one day I just realized, which is actually quite logical now to me, that at the heart of IVF, so IVF being in vitro fertilization, there is cell culture because you maintain cells, so embryos, alive for 5 to 6 days before you reimplant back in the patient. And what was really interesting is that as I started talking to embryologists who are the lab experts, in IVF, lots of my frustrations resonated with them, with cell culture, and in particular with the lack of tools to image, to analyze, images and videos of embryos. And I'm showing you here an example. Again, we can talk about it later, but what you're seeing here is an embryo going from day 1 to probably day 5 or day 6. If you're a biologist, you probably are understanding a bit of what's happening, but the point is there's a lot happening. You're going from one cell to hundreds of cells. And what happens often today in the lab is embryologists spend a lot of time analyzing these images to try and have a sense of which embryo has the highest chance of leading to a pregnancy. And even once they've spent all this time, they're still unsure of what it is that happens in these videos that can help you predict which one should be implanted first. And so I'll go back to it later, but this is essentially how it got to the idea. And so that's when I started the company. To give you an idea, we incorporated the company in August 2019, so we're not even a year old. And we pitched to Entrepreneur First, again, that was in summer 2019. We were selected as one of the promising teams. So what they do is, to give you an idea, I think we started out as 55 participants. You team up generally as 2. And so in the end, I think we were 8 teams of 2 that were selected. So 16 out of 55, something like this. We're given each 90K, of course, against shares. And then the idea is that you follow their model, which is to try and fundraise pretty fast. And so 3 months later, I pitched in front of 500 investors in London, and I started the fundraising process to try and fundraise and accelerate the company. Again, we can talk about it later if you have questions. To give you a little more context, why do we really care about IVF? Presumably, I think we all have heard of it. Infertility. Infertility is a big problem. 1 out of 7 couples suffer from infertility today, and their main medical hope is, well, often is in vitro fertilization or IVF. And so as you're seeing on the graph on the right, what I'm showing to you on the y-axis is the success rate of IVF. This is actually based on data in the UK as a function of time, starting from 2005. What you probably are seeing is that it hovers at around 30%, and also it only increases very slowly. So the point is, it's a process that is really hard for reasons we can discuss later. But for patients, it's obviously not great because it means you have to repeat often this process, which is a lot of money, it's emotionally draining, and it takes a lot of time, often at an age where you don't have much time. So the problem is very real, and it actually, data is indicating that it's not going to get any better. And so let me tell you a little bit more about what is IVF. What I'm showing you in this diagram, if we go from left to right, is, you take sperm, you take ovules, and then you generate embryos. In this diagram, it's 3 embryos per couple. Okay, you have embryo 1, 2, 3. And then you maintain them alive in the lab, so in an incubator, probably you all know what it is, that maintains, temperature and gas content for 5 to 6 days generally. And then you have to choose which one you reimplant back in the patient, right, in the uterus. The idea is that up until now, because we have to remember the first adult that was born out of IVF, who's Brown, I think is now 41 or 40. So we don't have that much time. It's not that old of a field, right? So we're still realizing and coming to grips with some things. And so up until now, what we would often do is reimplant, 2 or 3 embryos back in the patient in the hopes that at least one would lead to a pregnancy. But the problem is that too often it leads to a multiple pregnancy, which we now realize can actually be a bit dangerous both for the mother and the children. So there's this new question out there, which is really, how do you know which embryo you should implant first? And sorry, here what I didn't mention is, to give you a little more data, is the fact that today 70% of couples don't have a baby after their first IVF cycle. So it really goes to show that there's lots of room for improvements. Obviously not getting to 100% success rate. As of today, there still is sterility that is really irreversible, but definitely room for improvement. So here what I'm showing to you is, if this graph is showing to you the success rate, the IVF success rate to get to a pregnancy, what we're currently trying to do is increase it by 5%. So what you're seeing is that, over 11 years, the success rate increased maybe by 5%. So if we manage to already increase it by 5% in a couple of years with our first tool, it's actually a lot. And to give you a sense, increasing it by 5% could mean, preventing 1 failed attempt per couple for 500K couple a year. Because as of today, approximately 2.5 million IVF cycles are performed every year. So I mean, it's no small feat, right? 5% is actually already a lot. So what is complicated about IVF? I mean, other than the fact that all of modern medicine is complicated, it's probably because it's heavily multifactorial. And also because it relies on a series of decisions, which I'm kind of showing to you on the left. So all I'm trying to show here is as you start IVF, you have a lot of factors to take into account: the female patient, the male patient, the couple, the gametes. You have an increasing amount of information that the doctor has to take into account. And at every step, they're going to have crucial questions. I'm only giving some examples here, like, would you need a donor as a function of, the origin of the infertility? How do you personalize hormonal dosage? How should you repeat the egg retrieval, which is, the process by which you take eggs outside of the female patient? Which embryo should you really select? And this is the decision that we're interested in. And so the problem today is that it's hard to increase success rate because clinicians lack the tools to really integrate all these factors and make the most of them and personalize decisions to increase chances that every couple actually has. And so what's really interesting here is that there's lots of ways to use AI to optimize all of these decisions. We decided to start with embryo evaluation for several reasons. The first one is because we are convinced with other experts too that this is where there's a lot of room for improvement, but also because this is where the data is, because when you hear AI, there must be data behind it, and not every step of the IVF workflow already has a lot of data available. And simply because this is where the traction was. When we were talking to clinics, they were saying, well, listen, this is where we could use some help. Because one thing I didn't mention is, when they have to choose which embryo they implant back in the patient, there's a couple of ways to do it. The first one is genetics, and I'm not going to go in too much detail in there. It is interesting, but essentially what they do is they cut open an embryo with a laser, and they or actually there's other ways, but they take some cells to see how many chromosomes are, if there's the right number of chromosomes, because if you don't have the right number of chromosomes, it's not even gonna grab on and lead to a pregnancy. Now, the problem with this is, first, some countries don't allow it, it's not legal. And second, it's very invasive, right? I mean, I don't think you'll find many doctors who are thrilled about the idea about cutting open an embryo. So obviously, there's the other option, which is non-invasive imaging. And so with that in mind, what they would do is take the embryo outside of the incubator and quickly look at it, and still a lot of labs do that, and have a sense, they grade it. Based on the morphology, they say, okay, this one looks good or not. And so here there's two problems. The first one is taking the embryo outside of the incubator is really not ideal, right? The change of temperature. But the second one is that you're really trying to judge the entire development of an embryo based on a few static images. And you don't need to be a biologist to imagine that you're missing out on a lot of information in doing that. And so what becomes interesting for us is that there's been this new development in fertility clinics, which is that in the last decade, they've been acquiring these new scopes, those time-lapse scopes. So again, if you're a biologist, you would know what they are. All they are in this case are scopes that have the incubator fitted inside of them, which means two things. The first one, you don't have to take the embryo in and out, which is fantastic. There's no change in temperature and gas content. But second, and even more interesting for us, you don't just have one image anymore. You have an image taken every 5 to 10 minutes for 5 to 6 days. So you're sitting on a ton of new exciting data. So these videos, the video that I showed you before, and which they're trying to really make the most of to answer this new question, as I said, which is, okay, so can we try to understand stuff from the development, from the morphokinetics, to have a sense of which one actually has the highest potential of leading to a child? Again, with the idea that if you can avoid for a couple to go through multiple attempts, that would be great. So this is the question we're trying to answer by approaching the IVF or workflow. But what's really fascinating and exciting is that there's many ways of helping in other positions, in other decisions of the IVF workflow with AI, which we'll move to later on once we've already created this first algorithm. And so what we're proposing at this stage is a SaaS platform. So SaaS stands for software as a service. I just took back the diagram I showed you before. So remember, this is the start of IVF. You generate embryos, you look at them under the scope, and when usually it's the doctor who kind of has to make their own decision as to which embryo has the highest potential, this is where they would be using our software, which based on deep learning would have been trained on previous videos of embryos where we do know whether it did or did not lead to a pregnancy and a birth. And with our help, they can make more robust, reliable, and informed decisions to know which one should be reimplanted back in the patient. And so just to give you a sense, we're still very early. As I said, we only started in August. So at this stage, and we can talk about it later if you're interested, we're still very much in basic R&D stages. we're collecting data because, you come to learn that, and this is actually a really interesting aspect, that with startups in AI and medical, one of the biggest barriers to entry is getting high quality, high volume data from clinics. So what I've been doing is really talking to clinics, mostly in Europe, in different countries, and asking them to share data so we can train the algorithm. And this is where we are so far. And what we're hoping to do is get the first version of this algorithm, this product, by mid next year, because it is a medical device, so we do need to go through a medical regulation. So again, if you want more information, we can talk about it after. I'm going to finish with a couple of slides as to why Paris. I was in Boston before. I was asked, okay, why do you go to Paris to do this? Because clearly the US is also an exciting area to start a company. Other than the fact that I am French, I hadn't been in France for 12 years, and I wanted to come back, even though I'm not from Paris. It's also because Paris is really turning into this vibrant ecosystem for startups. These are only a few examples of places I've gone to with my company, which are really playing a big part, in helping out startups. The first one is Station F, which maybe you've heard of. Essentially, it's this old train station in the 13th that Xavier Niel turned into a huge incubator startup, which has different programs. So it hosts Entrepreneur First, which is why I was there, but has a ton of, like, even Google, Facebook, lots of programs that can welcome all kinds of startups. Agoranav is an incubator, much smaller, but great too, much more oriented towards deep tech, which is also something I really like. It means that there's more homogeneity with respect to the subtext that startups really deal with. It's in the 6th on Boulevard Raspail, and it's really great. I would really highly recommend if you ever start a company and go there, or even if you look for jobs in startups, because there's tons of things happening there, not just medical, but it has quite a few medical startups. And also they're really good at offering help to help you out, as you're starting the company. And then, as I mentioned, Entrepreneur First, great program that helped me really get out of my shell, get out of my academic shell. Another aspect of being in France, which I'm not going to get in details, is there are a lot of government incentives, right? Especially geared towards deep tech companies. The first ones are tax incentives. So I'm not going to bore you with this, but like there's statutes like JI, Jeune Entreprise Innovante, CIR, Crédit Impôt Recherche, which really are targeted towards R&D deep tech companies and help you pay less taxes, cheaper salaries. So this is actually quite helpful for early startups. And then there's the BPI, the Banque Privée d'Investissement, which is a government bank. And so this is, sorry, you probably don't see much of this slide. You can find it online, but this is just to say that they have a lot of grants. I don't know if a lot, but they have quite a few grants, especially geared towards young R&D companies that don't generate revenues, because we're not going to generate revenues for a while. And we actually obtained one of them. It's called the Bourse Deep Tech Emergence, which is 90,000 euros. And that was super helpful to start with. So this is only a few reasons as to why really I think it's a really great time to be in Paris, if not to start a company, to join one. And also, of course, this is my last slide, great talent. There's really lots of brilliant schools and people around Paris, and not just French, by the way, it's quite international. So I feel like it's really a good time to be building strong teams. What I'm showing you here is a picture of Felipe de los Tomatos, who was joined ImVitro a couple of months ago. He's the first data scientist, and he's been fantastic. He was almost like made to join the company because he's a biomedical engineer, and during his master's he actually had used AI to analyze images of embryos. So let me tell you that when I received his CV and his cover letter, I was super excited. He then did a PhD at Ecole Normale Supérieure, analyzing cells in 2D, 3D, and time-lapse, for the data sets. And he joined to start, with the entire analysis of embryo videos. So right now we're only 2. So as I said, really small, but we're growing fast. I just fundraised. I told you that I started the process through Entrepreneur First. And the good news is that a few months ago, I closed the seed round, and which is why we're now in a hiring spree. I want us to be, 6 or 7 in 5-6 months. And we're currently looking for a machine learning engineer, a software engineer, and operations manager, just to really get things started and make sure we can get a product out, as I said, in the next the end of the next year. So if you're interested, if you know anyone who's interested, please send me an email. There's all the information in our company page on LinkedIn. And I think that's it on my end. As I said, if you have any question now or later on, feel free to reach out. I think the one thing I want to leave you with is, again, I was an academic. To be fair, I'm kind of an academic at heart. I love research. I still love fundamental research. And I know that it can be a bit daunting, to not know where to go. So if you think I can help you with my experience, reach out, because I think that's the best way to really explore all your options and make sure you're leaving for the good reasons. There you go, Julia. Let me know what to do now.
Thank you very much. It was a very, very nice talk.
Thank you.
You gave us a lot of interesting information about the startups and biological part, and a little bit about deep learning.
Yeah,
part.
sorry. I don't think I didn't want to go too deep in any of it because I wasn't sure which one people would be interested in.
I think now we can see by the questions.
Which, by the way, let me find them because I was in full. Is it okay if I stop sharing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, just so that I don't start.
Yeah, I think we start having some questions.
Okay, so do you want me to go one by one? I think there's only a few. Okay.
Yeah, for now.
First question, is 1 out of 7 stats for the whole world or the UK? Good question. So the first thing I will say, disclaimer, I think it's really hard to find good stats. As you can imagine, like infertility is not the easiest thing to report. So to answer your question, it's worldwide, but it's really to be taken lightly. It's a good ballpark. If you look on the WHO website, that's the kind of stuff they'll tell you about. It's 15%. So it's not in the UK. And you will find, obviously, geographical differences, huge differences, obviously, based on age. So this is only just to say it's a big problem. And again, I don't know about you, but I think in this day and age, I'm 30, and so it's hard, I feel, to not know people who are going through this problem. So mostly to just say it's a big problem. Then, by the way, you can actually talk on, take the mic and talk if you want. Are doctors okay with getting a suggestion from a black box algorithm without knowing exactly which feature of the target embryo makes it a good candidate for IVF? Fantastic question. So are they okay? I think the easy answer is they'll never be okay. I wouldn't be okay. Just straight up believing a black box. And by the way, this is a problem for any AI medical company. It's really the idea that DL is a black box. So to answer your question, I think really, and this is going to be a big effort, is to convince them you need to do, I suppose, a couple of things. And so first one is validating. So first one is make sure you're training it on high quality data, which is actually harder than it sounds. Because the reality of medical data is not always really pretty. Second one is to actually make sure you actually train it, you create the proper algorithm and you publish it, because you want to show that you're doing a good work, and validate it, right? And so really have solid retrospective and really prospective clinical trials, which is quite hard, to show them that really it's not just, you don't just have to believe us. And then the last thing I'll say is there's ways, and things are getting better on that end, to add information. And so I'm not going to go too much in detail, but it's not just going to be, hey, this is a score, believe me. It's going to be, hey, this is a core. This is the information you normally rely on. So we're also helping you in some ways automate this process. So you have your typical milestones, or that's not the right word, but you're the variables you normally look at. And the idea is really to start helping them see in the image what it is that matters. Sorry, this was a very broad answer, but the reality is that I think this is a great question, because this is really the biggest problem, I think, right now with AI medics, because at the end of the day, the liability lies with them. Like, it's not going to be our responsibility, it's going to be theirs. So I feel like this is where probably most of the how do you say that, the added value is going to be. And I don't think there's one easy answer, other than, by the way, working closely with them to make sure you're actually doing something they're going to trust. You can tell me if I'm not answering your questions correctly. Okay, wait. Is that okay, Julia, for me to just go down the questions?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
If someone wants to ask personally, it would have been also great.
Yeah, by the way, if you want to take the mic. It'd be loud. Did you have a prototype, I suppose, or a patent when you started raising money? Great question. What's the market capitalization for ImVitro? As an academic, how do you supplement business skills? Did you have a prototype? Well, we did have a proof of concept. We didn't have a patent back then. We filed for one. the proof of concept, I wouldn't call it a prototype. It was more like, hey, we have access to this public UK database. We can show you, we can do machine learning. But really, as I said, the trick here is to get data, to get high quality data. So we didn't have it back then anyway. So we didn't have a full working prototype. It's always better, but really, I think that we managed to get away without it. As an academic, how do you supplement? Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I think I know. You just learn on the go. Sorry, that was not a really great answer. You look for help. And again, for example, the program, the Entrepreneur First program, was great because they give you, it's not an MBA, right? But they give you some seminars to introduce you to some concept that I had strictly no idea about. So there's that. There's lots of self-learning. But to be fair, I think there's lots of, first you have to like it. That's nothing. It doesn't sound like much, but you have to be okay, because most of my work was just going straight up, talking to doctors, trying to convince them. And so I feel like it's something that you just, have to go for. And yeah, eventually what you do is get advisors and make sure you surround yourself either with other founders who went through these kinds of things, or actual business advisors. And of course, when you have investors, they're going to be there to help you, hopefully if they're good investors. But yeah, it's a good question. I do generally think if you like it, if you're motivated, it's something you can pick up at least part of it, and then you can find help for the rest.
I have a related question. Would you
Yeah.
consider yourself a go for an MBA in the future, or you think it's?
So it's a good question. No, because you know why? Because and I've never done an MBA, right? So it's just me saying that. I keep telling Felipe that actually it's because I feel like every month I've done an MBA. So I haven't done an MBA, so I can't tell you that. But I feel like I'm learning so much that I wouldn't see. I mean, I'm sure there's tons of good reasons to do an MBA, but after starting a company, I feel like you learn. It's so exciting to learn as you go. Obviously, it's riskier. Don't get me wrong. That if anything, I would recommend doing that. No, actually, I don't know if I should say that because I haven't done an MBA, but no, I wouldn't. Also, going back to studying after starting a company, I don't know how I would take that.
Yeah, that makes sense totally.
Is there any information about your approach to MLDs, what models or methods, any research papers? So no, there's research papers about other groups that have done that, academic groups. I definitely can't give you that much information, mostly because we're not super advanced, but second because it's confidential and it's becoming a crowded space, so you need to be careful with what you share or not. But however, as I said, once we're done with it, we want to publish, we definitely want to share with the community. So sorry about that. I mean, the main thing I can tell you, as I said, is you mentioned it, but it's going to be deep learning, mostly using the videos. Very nice presentation, thank you, and work. Did EF help you on setting up the company? Was it hard? EF definitely started, helped. So I don't know about this question because it can mean tons of different things. Let me go back, take a step back with EF. What they do is first, presumably so I didn't mention this, but if you're accepted, so there's an interview process, right? If you're accepted, you have a stipend. You're paid 2,000 euros for 3 months, which is not nothing, especially when you're doing something risky. So with that, I feel like they already help you kind of de-risk a tiny bit. Second, they're surrounding you with people who are doing the same thing as you. And it sounds like nothing, but it's huge, because sometimes, trust me, especially when you get out of academia, or when you know that you could have found a job that would have been maybe more comfortable, you wake up and you're like, why am I doing this? And it's always great to be surrounded by 49 other crazy person where you can talk to, like, okay, well, at least I'm not the only nut job around. So that's actually a huge help. And they have a great alumni network because they have lots of companies, so you can reach out to them. So in that sense, they help. Then, just to complete the answer, as I said, if they're interested in your company, what they do is give you 90K. So you can imagine is a huge help to start with. And they do help you incorporate in the sense that they have their scheme, right? They have, you get your own lawyer, you sign your own papers, but they have this scheme they want to scale and apply to as many people as you want. So in that sense, they do help. They're still investors, by the way. So you won't always necessarily have the same interest. You just need to make sure you align yourself. And so in that sense, they help. And then they really help you prepare the pitch, because again, I had never pitched in front of investors. I think so for 2-3 months, what you work on is really digging into the market research, all these words that I had no idea about, the business plan, the proof of concept, if you have stuff to work on. and really learn to pitch and learn to sell a vision, because when you're this early, a lot of it is selling the vision. Is a lot of it is like, listen, the team is like this, we can do it. So in that sense, they do help you really prepare the material, apprehend questions of investors, because really I ended up talking to like 70 funds. It's venture capital funds, BAs, family offices. Trust me, it's great fun, but it's not easy. And so it's a whole art that they do help you kind of learn. So to make a very long story short, yes, it was, they do help. Yes, it's hard. I mean, I think as academics, it's hard too. The one thing I'll say is, at least for me, it was great having gone in a way through PhD postdoc, because personally I had worked a lot, especially when you do cell culture, you have to go in the lab every weekend. So it wasn't hard in the sense of quantity. It's a lot of work, but for me, what I think was, and is by the way still hard, is more the emotional charge. I don't know if I'm going to explain myself, but in a way, when you're in academia, and I don't mean to downplay, because I know it's hard. I've never tried to be a PI. I almost tried. I started writing my application, but so I'm sure it's really hard in different ways. But here, it's just, I don't know how to explain it, but it's, so first, you're legally representing the company. If something goes wrong, it's you. Like, it's not the university. It's not you're in charge. I don't know if you're liable for anything that goes wrong. And that's not nothing, right? When you have employees, like, all these responsibilities is a thing. But I think what I mean by emotional charge is just, you're gonna hear so many times. You're gonna hear no so many times. Like, I talked to 70 funds. I ended up finding 2 or 3 that are interesting. That's 67 funds who told me either nicely or, trust me, not nicely, you're never going to manage to do this, don't do it. So one of them actually spent 10 minutes giving me every reason in the world to not do it, which I found amazing. I was like, don't you have anything else better to do in your life? So really, emotionally, it's really hard, because you have to almost become stubborn and decide that it's going to work. And for me, what really helped me is that I set myself a time limit. I remember I was like, you know what, if in, I don't know, 7 months we didn't get to this point, I'll stop. And it really helped me stay sane. And the last thing I'll say, and I think that might be interesting for academics, for scientists, is and it's the same to this day, one of the hard things for me is you kind of become a bit, especially at the beginning, schizophrenic. So let me explain you why. I'm an engineer, and I'm really trained as, there's a problem, you solve it. And in the business world, or what I'm seeing, it's not always like that, right? There's no yes or no answer. And it's an art that really is hard to learn. And more than that, especially when you're alone to start with, you have to wear all the hats. So let me just explain a little more. When you're in front of investors, you have to like sell the vision hardcore. And by the way, probably like when I say sell, you have to believe in it, of course, because it's not going to work. So you have to be out there pitching. And again, I love pitching, but it takes a lot of energy out of you. Then once you change the people you talk to, you have, for me, the clinics, and there you don't have to sell the vision. They're doctors, they're scientists, so you have to switch and gear your mind to another approach. Then your employees, and I have to say, for me, this is really great, but this is by far the hardest, because at least when you're an academic, PhD or postdoc, you don't have this kind of diversity in the people you talk to, at least in my experience. I mean, yes, you have conferences, but it's generally always scientists. And the fact that you have to always switch and switch profile is really difficult. And this is where hiring is going to become key. Like, I'm in the process right now where I'm hiring people exactly for this reason. So I can just take this part of the job and personality and, really confide in them, be like, okay, you're going to be my engineer side, you're going to be my business side. And this is where it's so key to make sure you hire good people you can trust, because they're going to be representing you, and they're going to be creating the product. That was a super long answer. You were mentioning that you got many scholarships restarting. In your opinion, what was the main thing that helped with that? Were you into research from? Okay, great question. I'm going to start with the second one. Was I in research from my bachelor's? So yes, in my bachelor's, I was at EPFL, and this was actually a great experience. I was in what was it called? The Blue Brain Lab. It's not that, actually it is interesting. What we're doing is reconstructing neurons in 3D. And it was a paid job actually, but I did it on the side. And so that did get me a little bit into research. My master's, I did a project that actually is the one that I decided to keep going for my PhD. And then obviously during my postdoc, I did research. Go back to your first question, scholarships. Yeah, so what it is that helped? So the first answer is that you should apply, like, you're going to apply to a lot and many are going to say no. So again, it's just it's normal. Try as much as you can. So my point is I got some and I didn't get many others. You tend to only talk about the stuff that you're successful at and not the ones you don't get. So definitely didn't get all of them. The main thing, I don't know, because I think it's kind of this self-fulfilling thing where for sure the CV does help a bit, like, you know, being at MIT, we all know it's a name that goes a long way. So probably that helped too, being in the right lab. But I feel like, at least in my hand, it was really being able to show and sell how it was going to help me and my career. So really making it clear, listen, this project is going to help me get really good at this, and this. And this is how it's going to help me for my next step. Because I feel like often they're really investing in in the project, of course, but in the person too, and making sure that it's going to be a stepping stone for another step, if this makes sense. So maybe this helped a lot. Otherwise, I don't know. Actually, it's a good question. Let me switch to the rest. Sounds good. I can't unmute. Okay. Well, that's a shame. Do you know if Julia? Because it looks like some of them can't
it should
unmute.
be all right. I mean, anyone who can, who wants some.
Can someone try to unmute to do a test?
No, it's fine. I couldn't unmute before, so.
Okay. Okay. Okay, wait. You were mentioning for the first time, okay. What are investors looking for? With a minimum that one, just to prove concept. Okay, so I think the first answer is I don't know. It's my first company. It's not like I know everything about companies. And also there's many different ways of starting a company. So I don't think there's one answer. What are they looking for? So I'm going to tell you what I was told, which is not necessarily the truth, but really at such an early stage, well, probably there's many things, but the one I remember is they're investing in people, like in the team. They want to know that they're investing in people that have the right fit for the project. So, and actually EF, the program always says that they really want to look out for your unfair advantage. What is it that makes you different from other people? What is it that you know through your studies that very few other people in the world know that are going to give you this edge? And so I feel like investors really, they're going to look out for, are you the right person and the right team, actually, which is another layer, because it's not easy, right, to find the right team that is never going to give up, or is going to be able to make the right decision, who's resilient, who's got the credibility, I don't know, making it up, right, the charisma, all these things. So I really think at such an early stage, it's this, if I had to guess, like top one, right? Of course, investors are here to make money, so maybe equally, or if not higher, I don't know. You do need to be in a thriving market, right? Like if you're great, but you're in a market that has no potential money, why would they back you? So that's of course important. And I think the idea is important, don't get me wrong, but especially at such an early stage, we all know that there's room for maneuver, right? As in, it's really hard to find the perfect idea right from the start. You know, they call it the product to market fit. Like, you can have an idea, but it's only when you confront it and when you iterate that you really know if you're going the right way. And that's probably something you're going to do even after you've received the money, if it makes sense. So I'm just trying to say that I think the idea is important, but my sense is that investors really want to make sure that you're going to be good at listening to the market, at always being able to pivot if need be flexible. And so to go back to your question, having a prototype makes a huge difference. Again, don't get me wrong. And again, there's company and company. We're in Deep Tech, which I don't know if you know, but I'm never sure, but it essentially means it's a really long R&D cycle. You can't just start generating revenues right away. But there's companies that can generate revenue right away, which by the way, could mean you don't need an investor, because remember, if you don't need investors, it's always better. So if you have a prototype, it's obviously much better. You're already de-risking. And just to give you a sense, when I was pitching to funds, lots of them, especially French ones, were telling me, hey, come back in a year when you already have done this, done the prototype. So essentially when you've de-risked it. And so yes, I get this approach, but at the end of the day, it's also VC funding. You're taking risks, and it's all about speed too, right? We have competitors. It would be weird if we didn't have competitors. So it's also a matter of getting money to hire and go fast. So again, having a prototype is great, but you don't always have the means to do it. So it's all about, you know, how fast do you need to go? If you don't need to go too fast and you can do some prototype on your end, always better, because really it de-risks it and it shows you can actually do what you're saying. But we were able to get away with, well, actually not get away, we have a proof of concept. So let me go, and patents, yeah, sorry, I just saw. I don't know that you need one. We didn't have one. I think you need to show that you're aware that you will need one. It depends on the space. It depends how crowded, you know. So I wouldn't say you need one, but this is again my small experience. How are you educating yourself about AI? So I'm still educating myself about AI, so to be completely transparent. Again, I'm a medical engineer. I'm not a data scientist, but like, you know, for anyone who's on a medical engineer, the first 3 years you do as much maths and engineering as like mechanologist. So I do have a strong basis of coding and maths. Not to say I could do, you know, AI or anything, but it's not like I'm a biologist and purely biologist. So in a way, I definitely can grasp notions. So to answer your question, I think it was mostly, and it is mostly, I'm educating myself, I'm reading about it, but also I'm not the one who does, and really like Felipe, at this stage, it's Felipe who's working and creating, and he's much more of a data scientist. So it's probably making sure you know the fundamentals so you can understand, because it is my job, right, to talk about it. And also I need to make sure it's done right. So you need to be able to ask the good questions, I think is really what matters. So you need to learn about the metrics, you know, what it is that makes an algorithm trustworthy or things like this. And so these are things that I kind of did know a bit about, because again, I don't want to demystify AI, but a lot of it is, you know, also standard maths. And B, just learning and on the go. And by the way, it's the same goes for data scientists, because my sense is that, especially deep learning, it's such a dynamic field that even experts, you know, in a year or two are going to have to revamp their knowledge. So I think that's what everyone does. You read papers, you try to, you know, read books and talk to people. And I think this is one thing I will say is just I've always done that in my life. I reach out excessively to people. I can't tell you how many times I've written to people and they haven't answered. I don't care anymore. I feel like it's helped me so much, because more often than not, and by the way, one thing I will say, if someone doesn't answer, don't be afraid to rewrite. It sounds obvious what I'm saying, maybe not the next day, but so many people don't answer because they're busy and not because they didn't mean to. And I can't tell you how many things I wouldn't have done if I had just said, oh, he or she hasn't answered, give up. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because same with AI. When I sometimes have questions, I have friends who are founders in AI companies. I call them up. I'm like, listen, I have no idea. So always just reach out and ask for help is at least a life lesson for me. Thank you very much. You're amazing. Thank you. Always great to hear. What do you think about potentially creating an AI space? So that's a great question. And human population. I will add another layer to that. So you and Felipe would be better at answering this question, but the entire quality of your algorithm is going to depend on the quality of your data and the way you label it. Again, I'm not a data scientist. I'm not going to go too much into detail. But for us, there's two things. Right now, I'm collecting data from several clinics, because really, I really wanted to make sure I didn't have a lot of data from one clinic, and make sure that I have data from several, even if it's less, from several clinics, for that reason, because I want to make sure we're not overfitting to the needs of one clinic, right? And this comes down, and I don't know if this is what you're hinting at in the question, bias in gender, and I don't know, age, lots of things. So it's a risk you need to be aware of, and you just need to make sure you source data really well to compensate for that. The other thing I will say, which I'm almost, if not equally more worried about, is bias, how do you say that? From the collection and the annotation of doctors. And this is an entire subject of its own. But the idea is that, you know, when you get data, more often than not, doctors, so in our case, right, doctors are going to tell us, oh, we think this embryo is good. We don't think this embryo is good. And as they're experts, right? I don't want to undermine, but even they know they're human, they're biased. And so a big worry I have is I want to make sure we bypass this bias. I want to make sure we're trying to choose the most objective labels, which, for example, in our case, is did it lead to a birth or a pregnancy or not? So I don't know if it answers your question, but it's something that is at the heart of the entire design of the algorithm, which is actually something I'm actually involved in. It doesn't require coding. It's just at the beginning you decide, okay, how do you treat which data? And so you have to admit there will be bias. It's just you have to take that into account to make sure you know which question you're answering. I don't know if it makes sense, but as a function of this bias, you're going to answer different questions. You need to be clear about it from the start, and then as you go, you can just make sure you know about it. But it is a big worry. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have a related question.
No, of course.
There is no visible difference between embryos. Like if you look by eye or do something, there's just no visible difference.
Is it that's a question? Yeah, no, so there is. So morphologically, if that's what you're asking,
yeah.
So there's two things. There's morphology and morphokinetic, right? So morphology is if you look at time, like one time, is there a difference? Morphokinetic is if you're looking at the developmental stage. There are differences. It's just you need to be an embryologist to detect them, but it could be as easy as making it up, right? Size, speed of cell division, and what's interesting is this is what they look out for. They have these because obviously they're experts, right? So they have these metrics that they think and they know for some of them are important, like as I said, like at what point did the first cell divide into a second cell? And not to say this is not important, but the reality is there's so many things that are happening that even they will admit probably it's not just the one thing, it's a synergy with all these things. So really, again, this is the perfect scenario with deep learning, which is like, okay, let's just feed the algorithm with these videos without even kind of qualifying what's happening. And probably not only are they going to be able to detect many more things at the same time, but also new things, because probably if there's biologists here, we all know that we're trained to look at images a certain way. When you see a cell, probably the first thing you see is like, okay, there's the nucleus, there's this. And there's a chance that we're biased into looking at only specific parameters. What if, I'm making it up, it's the shadow that appears on the upper right hand that matters, and we're not trained to look at it. So to answer your question, there are things that do visibly change. They're hard to capture. And if anything, this is what we want to make sure we actually take into account.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Okay. What do I think? Have you ever had negative thoughts about possibility of failure? Every day. No, I'm kidding. So failure, if so, how do you fight them? What encourages you? No, I shouldn't say that because now we've actually advanced quite a lot. Yes, so failure is, in my experience, again, it's only been less than a year, so I'm still learning a lot. It's something you need to be more than comfortable with. At least for me, it was like, as I told you, I was talking to investors. I was more than ready going in. I was like, okay, like I don't know, making it up, 99% chance that they're going to say no. It's okay. Why? Because there's good failure and bad failure. And so I go in being like, even if I fail, I need to learn from it. And I feel like that really helped me a lot because even when it was really negative, you actually do learn from it. So failure is something that you can't, in my experience, you can't ignore, because I don't think that would be really healthy. It's kind of this fine line where you have to be stubborn. It's actually really hard because you have to be listening to the customers, to the people, because you don't want to be this person who thinks they're right and doesn't listen to the others. But at the same time, you also have to detect when it is toxic, negative, or not constructive feedback. So it's really hard, I have to say. And some days it's really hard. I'm being transparent. Some days it's great. I will say it's kind of like almost being a bit bipolar. Like in the same day, you'll have like an hour where you have amazing news and you're like pumped up, and then the next hour it's like, oh my god, are you serious? Like, are we going to survive? And so you have to be okay with that. I have to say, in my experience, I think PhDs, I was going to say is the same, or postdoc, not nearly the same, in the sense that, again, you're not the legal representative, you don't have money at stake, but you're used to like a week things work, the other, like, my god, like, why is it not working? And you're alone. So in that sense, it was a bit like helpful. But how do I fight them? Couple of ways. You surround yourself. Being alone, like I've gone through a few months where I was alone, and it's just not fun. Things are going great, so I don't want to dramatize, but just never stay alone. Just even if it's friends, who cares? Like anyone, just don't stay alone. Second thing is go meet founders. If you're doing this, go meet people who do the same thing as you, because it's insane how even a 1-hour conversation can help you. And again, this is where I reach out like crazy. I write on LinkedIn to founders of companies that are way bigger than me, and I'm like, hey, can you grab coffee with me, because it would be really helpful. 90% don't answer. It's fine. I don't mind. Like, people are busy. The 10% that do, they're great, wonderful. You have coffee and you tell them what you're going through, and they'll tell you, yeah, I went through the same thing. And it's little things like that that are helping me all the time, even as of today. And what encourages me, man, many things. So I don't know, the idea. So I feel like, again, as scientists, you're a bit of an entrepreneur. So it's I'm exaggerating, because what I really liked in my research at PhD and postdoc is generally, or at least if you're in a nice lab or independent lab, you're the one who comes up with the idea, creates the hypothesis, designs the experiment, at least in experimental biology, does the experiment, the paper. So you're really seeing every facet of it. And I remember really liking that. And it's the same with the company. I mean, seeing something grow from nothing, like literally, it's kind of like 9 months ago, it was nothing. It was me, we're like, oh, could we try this? And seeing it grow and is just, honestly, it's amazing. That's the first thing. It's just materializing something out of thin air is fantastic. The second thing is building a team is amazing. It's you're convincing people to join you on this crazy adventure, because, you know, I'm trying to recruit now, and some of them are in really comfortable jobs, and you're really trying to be like, no, but come on, like, you're missing out on this great adventure, because it is a great human adventure. You're really trying this thing. You don't know if it's going to work. You're giving it all you have. So I really feel like the human side of things is really what encouraged me a lot. And maybe the third and most important thing is creating the product. I mean, if we make this happen, which we will, it's going to be amazing. If you can say like, hey, we've created a product that can help, you know, clinics, but at the end, patients, it's amazing, because I haven't even started talking about it, but I was not aware of, I don't have any personal experience with IVF, but like, now that you get into this subject, it is fascinating. I mean, it's sad, but it's fascinating for many reasons. And so I feel like having this passion for the problem you're solving is fundamental, because you're gonna, as I said, you're gonna pivot. You're gonna start with this one solution, and you're gonna realize, oh, maybe it's not the best solution, but while always keeping in mind the same problem. We're here to help patients make sure that they can actually have a child if they want to. I mean, I don't know, like, I don't have children right now. I don't want children right now, but I have friends who do. And again, so what encourages me is just having this end goal. And if I can actually get a product out, and not just, and this is not condescending at all, a publication. It's really hard to get publications, like, and don't get me wrong, but to actually see it in the market and actually being used, I think I'd be, you know, over the moon. Again, very long answer. When was this meeting supposed to end? you should cut me short, by the way, because
I want to ask a quick question before
okay.
the end of this meeting. I want to hear about more details about your fundraising process. You said that after receiving this initial investment, it was hard. After getting the investment of Entrepreneur First, it was hard, and I want to have more details on this. Ideally, you know, with some numbers put on the time axis, and also highlighting some key features that you think made it for you.
Okay. So to go back in time, when I say it was hard, it's hard for everyone, right? The hard part was, yeah, so sorry, I'm going back in time, because I feel like, because it was hard, I'm blocking it out of my memory. So I think there's several things, right? It's hard because you're at such an early stage that you have to convince them that you're gonna be the one that can do it. That means a lot of things, but it's hard because you have to de-risk a lot of things. You have 3 months. By the way, this is the model of EF. Like, not everyone raises in 6 months. It's not always a good idea. You have grants. So in this case, we only have 3 months, and you have to de-risk as many things as you can. And so, as I said, first element is the team. So you have to show that you're really the person that can deal with it. And that's not always easy, right? Because no one's perfect. So you really have to learn how to compensate for the lack of, I don't know, like, experience in business, and that's one thing. You have to de-risk the product. So can you build a prototype? You don't always have time. You don't always have the data for it. And then you have to de-risk, learn all of these things about market, kind of project yourself, create a business plan. And it's a lot of speculation. So for me, it was hard because I'm not used to doing that. And then lastly is what I told you, you talk to a lot of people. I mean, 70 meetings, each of 30 minutes to 1 hour. And then second meeting. So the ones that are interested, I don't know if maybe I'm making it up. I don't remember exactly, but of those meetings, 30% are interested in a second meeting, and then of those meetings, only 10% or so. It's a long process. It's draining. You have to be passionate. I mean, I am passionate naturally, but you have to be like on the ball at every meeting. So I think that's also what I mean by hard, is just, you can't lose faith, because they will feel it, and once they feel it, it's over. And then it takes time, right? Even when people express interest, then there's a whole legal part of it, okay, let's negotiate how much money against how many shares. And all of that just takes a lot of energy. But I will say, this is also where, and this is super important, I think, there's money and there's smart money. Money is important, don't get me wrong, and again, I only have this one experience, but I found wonderful investors. Like, again, it's only the first investors I work with, but I have to say they've been amazing from the start. And that has a huge added value because it's not just money. It's like they help you. And I don't know if this answers your question, but they help you figure out some things. Obviously, they have their interest in mind. Don't get me wrong, but they help you figure out a lot of things. And through the negotiation process, that can be quite hard to know if you can trust them or not. But this is where I would say, don't just take any money. Make sure you're aligned because it's probably going to be a long-term relationship. I don't know if I answered your question.
Can you share also some numbers, some figures?
The figures of what?
Like how much money did you raise?
1.3 million.
And it took you after to get to this after the EF investment.
It took what?
How long did it take you after receiving EF investment?
So I started fundraising end of September and so October, November, December. So like 6-7 months from the very first meetings to actually closing and having the money.
Okay.
And I think that's pretty common. They generally say could have been faster. Also, by the way, COVID happened. But I think it's generally typical from 5 years.
Okay.
And I think there's just one last question. How are you going to extract predicting any algorithms already? No, there's no algorithms already that we're going to use. It's, as I said, it's literally taking data, training, seeing how it goes with maybe what we'll use is the ones that already exist, from online and stuff, and then tweaking it. So, and again, I don't, this is important at this stage, we're not extracting morphological features. We're really just training it based on the outcome and seeing what happens because I want to avoid any bias.
Actually, one quick question here. I'm curious, are you using any cloud solution for training your models, or do you have like physical hardware that you use for that?
So I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but it's going to be it's going to be cloud-based. And so for now, we use AWS. Again, I'm not sure that answers your question, but this is definitely not going to be local things we're going to use now.
Yeah, some people buy their own hardware and keep it in-house, and it gets more complicated to maintain and to...
Yeah, absolutely. But again, this is the start.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I added you on
Sorry?
I added you on LinkedIn, by the way.
Okay, okay, I'll accept you. I hope this was helpful to you guys somehow.
I think, sorry, there is one last question from Evgeny, still in the chat. How are you going to extract morphological features predicting IVF?
So I think this is what I was trying to answer. I was trying to say that I'm not extracting, or we are not extracting features right now. What we're trying to do is literally just label, like try to see which ones do or do not. I don't know if my answer is clear, but lead to a success. And then what we'll do is once we train that, we might try and extract information to convince them. This goes back to the question before, right? How do you if you just throw out a number, they might not trust you. So what you might do is complete it with the information they normally extract. So that's definitely going to be more of a second step, which means that we haven't done it yet, and I can't really answer the question. Cool. Well, thanks for all the questions. And as I said, if you think I can help you with anything, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, I guess we don't have any more questions. So yeah, indeed. Thank you for the speaker. It was very informative and inspiring. I really enjoyed this startup because I think it really can help change lives and can have a great impact.
Let's cross our fingers. And thanks again for inviting me. This was great.
Thank you very much for coming and for everyone who listened. So
yeah, thank you all for coming out. Have a great rest of the evening.
Hope to see you again and ciao.